All right, I will say good morning. Good morning. Let us begin. Baruch beautiful daf out of us today. Begin by thanking all of our sponsors. To thank our TALMUD Torah sponsors for the month of Teves. To thank the Daf Yomi Shiur for dedicating the Shiur Midrashos this month in memory of Mr. Milton Marder, Mordechai Dovid, and Rephael HaKohen, Zichron Brocha. To thank the Elbaum Mishpacha for dedicating all the Shiur Midrashos this month in commemoration of the yahrzeit of Gerald Elbaum, Yaakov Kopel, Ben R Avraham Menachem, and to thank our Daf Yomi sponsors Boruch and Brocha Rivkin for dedicating the Shiur today in commemoration of the yahrzeit of Rabbi Reuven, Rivkin, Harav Reuven ben Tzvi, Zichron Brocha. We hope that of the merit of our TALMUD Torah, all of the neshama slav and aliyah, the families a neshama. Well, so with that, let us begin. A lot to do today. Today's daf is Ayin Test 79. We are picking up. Where are we picking up? Oh, Masid Rav Chisda, 2 lines up from the bottom on 78b. So mostly just to reorient ourselves a little bit, we had a dramatic, striking, overwhelming, and profoundly confusing statement of Rabbi Hanina in the middle of Amud Beis, towards the end of yesterday's shiur. Rabbi Hanina said as follows. Up until now, Rabbi we've been focusing on the concept of hafara. Right? Remember again, this parak of Nara Murasa is all about hafara, the ability of a husband or a father to go ahead and annul the wife's neder or the daughter's neder. Good. So we'll say, so we've always operated with the idea that the window for that annulment is biyom sham'o. One day. Machlokes, is it me'es la'es, 24 hours? Is it a calendar day? We saw that Rambam Paskins that it's a calendar day. Fine. Comes to Rabbi Hanina. Rabbi Hanina says, if a husband is silent on the day that his wife made a neder, and the reason for his silence is why? To go ahead and cause her agmas nefesh, to cause her problems, right? To make her upset. He's doing it so she should think. It's kind of like the opposite of what we just learned. It's incredible, right? So we're just talking all about love. It's good. It's good to know the opposites, right? Good to know the opposites. So again, see, he's doing this. He wants her to think. That he has confirmed the neder. But in reality, it's in his entire intent to go ahead and annul the neder. Rabbi Hanina says he reserves the power of revocation even 10 days from now. Okay, so a strange statement. So we'll say the Gemara is actively trying to refute this statement. So the Gemara says as follows: Masid Rav Chisda. So Rav Chisda raises another shaila or another kasha. Masid Rav Chisda chomer behakim behefer. We both say there is a chumrah that exists with hekam. Hekam means affirming the neder. So there's a chumrah in neder affirmation that is above or that is more than neder revocation. So the Gemara says mibehafer ubehafer mibehekem, and then there's a chumrah in neder revocation over neder affirmation. Okay, what does this mean? Chomer behekem. So we'll say, what's the chumrah in neder affirmation? Top of ayin tes shashtika mikayemes vein shtika mivatelas. So I will say it's interesting. We know this already. When it comes to affirmation, right, a neder could be affirmed even through how? Silence. If the husband says absolutely nothing on the day, throughout the day, that she makes the neder, ultimately the neder is affirmed. Shashtika mekayemes. So neder affirmation could take place through silence. Vein shtika mivatelas. But I will say if the wife makes a neder, ultimately, again, his silence does not have the ability to be mevatel the neder. Can't revoke the neder. Okay. Furthermore, kiyem belibo kiyem. We'll say not only that, but along the same lines, the same way that silence has the ability to affirm the neder, so what else has the ability to affirm the neder? Kiyem belibo. Kiyem belibo means if he affirms the neder cognitively. In other words, Rachel makes the neder. Reuven says in his mind, yeah, good job. Or I affirm this neder. What's the halacha? The neder is affirmed. I will say it's the same thing. In other words, once you establish already that silence has the ability to affirm the neder, then by definition, obviously, if he does it cognitively, belibo, that affirms the neder as well. If you look at the Ran says over here, literally right across left-hand column, first line, kiyem belibo kiyem, shein tzarach lahotzi b'svasa. The idea over here is that neder affirmation does not require any type of verbal articulation. In other words, right, that's it. It would make sense. Because again, we'll say, what do you need in order to go ahead? What does a husband need to do in order to affirm his wife's neder? Nothing. Remember again, the failure to act, by definition, goes ahead and affirms the neder, right? If he does nothing. So the fact that he doesn't have to do anything, that means ultimately total passivity, and even cognitive affirmation goes in as mekayimit. On the other hand, hefer belibo, ain't mufar. So on the other hand, halacha l'maisa again, so we'll call it cognitive annulment, does nothing. right? So Rachel makes a neder, and Reuven in his mind says, I am mefer this neder. Such a cognitive annulment does absolutely nothing. Good. So hefer beliba ein mufar. So furthermore, kiyem ein yachal hafer. Once a neder is affirmed, it cannot be revoked. Hefer ein yachal kayim. Right. So ultimately, again, if halacha l'maisa, he annulled it. Ultimately, it cannot be upheld. Now, I will say this is all talking about on the same day, right? On the same day. Although we're going to qualify this statement in just a little bit, but again, for now, we're saying once you go ahead and affirm the neder, you can't annul it. Once you annul it, you can't affirm it. Now, I will say, now watch this. It says, why is this important for us? Katoni shashtika mekayemes. Now, I will say, what did the Brisa say? The Brisa said that shtika, silence, could affirm the neder. Now, I will say, what type of silence are we talking about? My lav b'shosek amanas lamekot. Are we not talking about a case where why is he being silent? Right? Why is he silent? He's being silent on the right for the purpose of we'll say the makeup means to agitate her. Right? In other words, he's being silent in order to go ahead and make her think that he's being makayim the neder, but he's really going to annul it. And yet, Rabbi say, what do we see? We see that even that type of silence affirms the neder. So in other words, this is a refutation of the position of Rabbi Chanina. Rabbi Chanina said, if you're knowingly silent for the purpose of agitating your wife, right, with the intention to go ahead and affirm the neder at some later point, that works. That works even 10 days later. You see from here that it doesn't work. My love b'shosek amanas l'meikat lo b'shosek amanas l'kaim. No, it's talking about a case where you're silent for the purpose of affirming the neder. The Gemara says, silent for the purpose of affirming the neder, hainu kiyem belibo kaim. We'll say that's the case of cognitive affirmation. In other words, if you're silent with the intention to go ahead and affirm the neder, so Bryce already said that case. That's the case of cognitive affirmation, which everyone says works. Ella b'shosek stam. Rather, I will say, no, what the Bryce is talking about is like this. We're talking about a case where a person is silent, and we don't know how to interpret their silence. We don't know how to interpret. So what's the chiddush? I will say. So the chiddush is that even if we don't know how to interpret your silence, maybe we don't know how to interpret the husband's silence. What's the halacha? The neder is affirmed. Silence is silence is silence, and when it comes to Nedarim, we interpret silence ultimately again as neder affirmation. But it's possible, maybe Rabbi Chanina is right, and maybe halacha l'maisa, if you're silent with the intention of being silent to upset your wife, with the intention to go and affirm the neder later on, maybe that does work. He'll say, by the way, it's interesting, you see from this Gemara something amazing. Why is silence so detrimental within a relationship? It's so profound. I'll say, why? Because what's the whole chap with silence? You don't know what it means. You don't know what it means. See, I will say, if we're in a relationship, and in marriage, whatever it might be, and we argue or we have a disagreement, okay, right? I know where you're holding and I know where I'm holding. So we might be on two totally different pages. And there might be a real problem with the fact that we're on two totally different, but we know it. We know it. The reason why silence is so destructive in the context of a relationship is what the Gemara just said. What's the case over here? The ela b'shosek stam. Let's say, what's shosek stam? Shosek stam means the person is silent, and I don't know what the silence means. I don't know what the silence means. Does the silence mean you're angry at me? Does the silence mean you're angry at yourself? Does the silence mean you're disappointed in life? You're disappointed in the relationship? I don't know what it means, and if I don't know, I will say, you know what happens when people don't know what something means in the context of a relationship? What do people do? Right? They create their own narratives. And that's the worst thing in the world. The worst thing is when there's this void of communication, and then parties create their own narratives. Because then that's where things really go off the rails. Because now a wife is thinking that things are like this, and a husband is thinking that things are like this. And meanwhile, they might both be right, but they might both be dramatically wrong. As opposed to, if there was communication doesn't necessarily solve the problems, but at least it frames the narrative. Now everyone is working with the same exact marital narrative, and there is no void which allows people to come up with their own marital storylines. Such an incredible yisod, I will say. Ashkichan chomer behekem behever. So now we've established the chumrah, so to speak, the stringency the stringency that affirmation has over annulment. So the Gemara says, "B'chomer beheker behefer, behefer beheker minal." And I will say, what's the chumrah that annulment has over affirmation? So it's very interesting. Rabbi Yochanan nish'alin ala hekem bein nish'alin ala afra. So we actually had this before. Well, see, here's the distinction. You could actually have your affirmation revoked, but you can't have your annulment revoked, which is very interesting, I would say. So, right, we saw the sugya already, that a husband confirms or affirms his wife's neder, and now he wants to go to a chacham to have that affirmation revoked. So he could do hatara. He could do hatara on his affirmation. On the other hand, you cannot do hatara on your revocation. Once a neder is revoked, that revocation cannot be annulled. Incredible. So that's the chumrah. So massive, Rav Kahana, suppose Rav Kahana raised the kasha. So let's say, so now I just want to point out once again, this whole brisa was brought up for what purpose? This whole brisa was brought up in order to go ahead and disprove the position of Rabbi Chanina. The point over here is we have not yet, we were not successful in that. So the position of Rabbi Chanina still stands. It's still here. Good, let's go weiter. So the Gemara said, "Well, say, by the way, I'll just point out the Ran qualifies this statement of nish'alin ala hekem. We had this before. Well, so when did we have this? Nish'alin ala hekem. We just had this shortly, a little while ago. All right, fine. Yeah, it was Samech Tes. Okay, so about 10 days ago. We had this. The Ran highlights over here on this concept. Nish'alin ala hekem. The Ran writes shim hekem. It's like about 15 lines up from before the Ran gets wide. Nish'alin ala hekem, shim hekem yochel lishal alav ba'osayom shmiya v'yochel lahafer b'albayom. So we'll say, so just want to point out, even though we say that a husband could go ahead and have his affirmation revoked, remember, all of this has to happen on the day in which he heard the neder. Conversely, ve'in nishalan ala hefer shim hefer shuv eni yochel lishal libatel osa hafara. Okay, fine. So Masib Rav Kahana is the kasha fim hacharish yacharish la isha. So the Torah says over here that if a husband will hear his wife make a neder and he is silent miyom el yom, he's silent for a day, then ultimately again the neder is upheld. So we'll say, what's the case here? B'shosek alminas lemekit hakosav medaber. Maybe the pasuk is talking about a case where I'll say if a husband is being silent for what purpose? For the purpose of agitating his wife. Right? Once again, he wants his wife to think that he's upholding the neder. Meanwhile, what's his intention? To revoke it at some later point. So b'shosek almanas lemekit hakosav medaber. So atom b'shosek. So we'll say, and what does that show you? Right? So that seems to indicate to us that even if that's the reason for your silence, ultimately what? Silence is affirmation. So this disproves the position of Rabbi Chanina. So atom b'shosek almanas lemekit. How do you know? How do you know that he's being silent in order to go ahead and agitate her? Maybe he's being silent for the purpose of upholding the neder. Kishu omer ki hecharish la hari b'shosek amanas l'kayim. The other pasuk says, or the previous phrase says, hecharish la. Right? He was silent for her. That's talking about a case ultimately where he was silent for the purpose of upholding the neder. Ha mani makayim im hecharish yacharish la. So I will say, so again, what do I need the hecharish yacharish la? That's coming to teach me what? So b'shosek amanas lemekit hakasa medaber. It's coming to teach me, I will say that even if you're silent for the purpose of agitation, ultimately silence is affirmation. To which the Gemara says, tiyufta. So I will say we have effectively disproven the position of Rabbi Chanina, that it doesn't really matter why you're silent. Whether you're silent because your silence represents cognitive affirmation, or whether you're silent because you have this whole plan, right, to mamish, like to do something to your wife, right, and you're going to be silent now and affirm the net, it doesn't make a difference. Silence is silence, or I should say, silence is affirmation, no matter what the purpose of your silence is. So therefore, I will say we've effectively refuted the position of Rabbi Chanina. Incredible. So the Gemara says, "V'lokim ha b'shosek amanas l'kayim ha b'shosek stam." So why not go ahead and set up one pasuk that's talking about a case where a person is silent for the purpose of cognitively affirming the neder, versus another case is just silence without a kavana. To which the Gemara says that's fine, but kra yisirik sidi. There are a number of different phrases Rabbi says speak about shtika. to speak about silence in the context of neder affirmation. And I will say, the point, bottom line is, however you want to plug in the psukim, one of those psukim teaches us that silence is affirmation, independent of whatever kavana you may have with your silence. Massive Rava. So Rava says as follows. Nodra, so we'll say, so here's what's interesting about this Gemara. We have disproven the position of Rabbi Hanina. Rabbi Hanina is incorrect, which means that even in that case, where Rachel makes the neder, Reuven hears it, Reuven says, okay, this is my chance, right? I'm gonna give it to Rachel, right? And what does he say? He says, you know what, I'm gonna be silent now, so she thinks I'm affirming the neder, but in reality, I'm going to annul the neder. And Chanina says, okay, even 10 days later you could annul the neder. We've refuted that position. That is incorrect. Silence on the day in which she makes the neder, by definition, is neder affirmation. Whether you had in mind to affirm, you didn't have in mind to affirm, you had kavana, you didn't have kavana, silence is affirmation. So we've refuted Rabbi Chanina. What's interesting is, for some reason, and I don't know how this works like in the structure of the Gemara, but for some reason, the Gemara is not happy with just one affirmation. We need to beat this down. In other words, I'll say, we are going to once again bring another disproof of Rabbi Hanina, which is very interesting. Massive Rava. So Rava raised another kasha. Nedarim chashecha. So also we had this before. Nedarim chashecha. This is beginning right 2 days ago. Nedarim chashecha. So we'll say, so remember again, what happens if Rachel makes a neder late Shabbos afternoon? Very late Shabbos afternoon. So Nedarim chashecha. Mefer. So ultimately again, so remember again, I will say, so Hafaras Nedarim is limited to one calendar day, which means if she makes the neder very late in the day, then what? He only has a very limited window. And I will say, I do want to point out the caveats. We're going to see this more specifically. Remember, when does the clock start for Hafaras Nedarim? When does it start? When he hears it. So I just want to point out, like, if she made a neder on Wednesday, but he doesn't hear it until Thursday, right? He doesn't hear about it until Thursday. Obviously, the window of Hafara can't start until he knows. So, for example, even in this case of Shabbos, she makes a neder, 10 minutes before Shabbos is over. So the idea that he only has 10 minutes now to revoke the neder only applies assuming that what? He heard the neder, right? Which, again, that's the classic case. He was there with her when she made the neder. Again, we'll see that more explicitly. In any event, she makes a neder late on Erev Shabbos, late on Shabbos day. So what's talacha? He could go and revoke that neder as long as the day has not ended. Shim lo hafer v'chashcha en yachal hafer. Because halacha l'maisa, if she made the neder, he heard it and he did not annul it, and now the day is over. We're done. Which essentially means what I will say, that again, failure to revoke, right? Failure to revoke, or the actively remaining silent, by definition, is affirmation of the neder. Says the Gemara, why? Amai. Lehavi kishosek amanas lamekit. So why not treat this as a case, ultimately, again, as a husband who was silent for the purpose, ultimately, of agitating his wife with the intention of confirming the neder, or with the intention of revoking the neder later on. We'll say, take a quick look at the Ran. The Ran it's we'll call it 3 lines into the wide lines. Vamai lehavi keshosek amanas lamekat di amar b'shosek amanas lamekat matzi meferla lefisha osa kama lo haisa dashes kaim haneder. So we'll say, if you accept Rabbi Hanina's view, namely that when a husband is silent with the intention that at a later date he is going to revoke the neder, that such a thing works. Why? Because the silence is not a true silence of affirmation, right? It's an antagonistic silence, right? So if we accept that premise, so what happens? Lo sadash kaimen eder kol shekain dihavo amri rabbanon deino mefer nedarim shilin tzarach hashabbos davi matzi mefer lehafer meshachashecha. So I'll say, certainly then in the case, if you also go with the idea that Chazal said you can't be mefer nedarim on Shabbos, that in this case, halacha l'maisa should be able to be made for it after Shabbos. Why? Because at the end of the day, the Ran says, why was he silent on Shabbos? Lav mishum kiyum. It's not because he meant to uphold the neder. Rather, it's because he chose not to do hafaras nedarim on Shabbos. So what the Gemara is saying essentially is, if Rabbi Hanina was right, it would open the door for shtika that does not automatically mean affirmation. The fact that halacha l'maisa we don't entertain that possibility indicates to us that Rabbi Hanina is wrong. To which the Gemara says, make it tiyufta. Ultimately, the fact that halacha l'maisa we do not entertain this possibility once again means Rabbi Hanina is wrong. Good. Second refutation of Rabbi Hanina. Here we go again. Maser Rashi. We're still not done. We've refuted Rabbi Hanina twice. Now I want to do it a third time. So it's actually a very interesting case. Yodea ani. So we'll actually see this case in a little while, which is really very interesting. Yodea ani sheish nedarim, aval ini yodea sheish mafir. Let's both listen to this case. Listen to this case. A person says, husband says, Reuven heard Rachel make a neder. Right? Reuven heard Rachel make a neder. He says, what happens? I know that there's a concept of nedarim. The husband, I never knew that there was a concept of revocation, or annulment, I should say. Right? And I never knew that concept. In other words, I never learned Daf Yomi. I had no idea that I had this possible. So the case over here we're going to see is, Rachel makes a neder on Monday. Okay, Thursday, Reuven comes to Shir. He learns that he has the power of hafara. He's like, wow, I never knew this before. I never knew this. So what do you do in a situation like this? So, right, Yodani Sheish Nedarim. So I always knew there was a concept of Nedarim, but I never knew that there was a concept of hafara. So what's the halacha? Yafer. He has the power of hafara. Now we'll say, now what does this mean? Take a look at the Ran again. So I'll say this is in the wide lines. 2, 4, 6, 8 lines up from the bottom. Maser Rashi Yodani Sheish Nedarim. Shenedarim Shenadra Ishto Havin Nedarim. So Reuven says, I know that my wife has the ability to make Nedarim. Aval ini yodeh sheyesh mafirin ran biyom sheshamati lo ayisi yodeh shabal yachal lahafer nidre ishto klal. So Reuven says, I never knew that I have the power to annul my wife's nedarim on the day she made nedarim. I never knew that. So we'll say, what's the halacha? Yafer b'soch osiyum shalamad shabal yachal lahafer dahu yom havleididei yom shmiyah. Aval ad hashta lo de lo mikri yom shmiyah. So listen to this. This is incredible. What's the chiddush over here? So Reuven says, right, let's go through this. Rachel makes a neder on Monday. Reuven hears the neder. He's like, okay, she made a neder. Thursday, he comes to Daf Yomi. He learns that he has the power to annul the neder. He's like, I never knew that. So what's the Rabbi say? Hina has the power to annul the neder when? On Thursday. Why? Like we said, what we said before. Because the day that he learns the power, that he has the power of hafara, is like the day that what? He just heard the neder. Incredible halacha. It's the day he heard the neder. Good, that's the halacha. On the other end of it, listen to this. What happens in the following case? What happens if Reuven says, I know, right, Rachel makes a neder on Monday. Okay, Reuven hears it. And Reuven says, now what happens? On the day that she made the neder, he knows, he's knowledgeable that he, as a husband, he has the power of hafara. What didn't he know? What didn't he realize? He didn't realize that the promise she made was a neder. For whatever reason, he didn't chap that what she said was a neder. Take a look at the Ran for just a moment. Oh, so that says, what does it mean? What does it mean? We'll say, this is our next parak. We're going to see, right? Right now, what it sounds like, based on our conversation, I will say, is what does a husband have the ability to be made for? What does he have, based on what we've learned, what does he have the ability to be made for? Sounds like anything. Right now, it sounds like anything. The next parak, the topic is going to be that it's not anything. It's not anything. His power of annulment is only devolves upon certain types of nedarim. So here's the case. Get ready for this. It's Monday. Rachel makes a neder. Reuven hears it. But Reuven thought he was powerless to do anything about that type of neder. Thursday, he comes to Shir. He realizes, we're going to start the new parak, the 11th parak of Nedarim. He learns, oh my gosh, that is the type of neder that I have the power of annulment. So I'll say, so in this case over here, he knew he had the power of annulment. What didn't he know? That this is the type of neder I have the ability to annul. So what's his status now on Thursday when he finds this out? So let's listen to this. Rabbi Meir says, Lo Yafer. Rabbi Meir says, sorry, he does not have the power of annulment. The window is closed. Why not? Look at the running. And Rabbi Meir Omer Lo Yafer. Achar Yom Shmiyah. The Chayvin Sheodeh Hu Shabal Mefer Nidre Ishto Mikrim Shmiyah. So we'll say Rabbi Meir says, since he knew on the day that she made the neder that he had the power of annulment, that's called Yom Shmiya. Even though he did not know this was the type of neder, right? He was fully knowledgeable about his annulment abilities. Because he was fully knowledgeable, the fact that he didn't know this was the type of neder he could annul doesn't matter. The window has closed, and he can no longer go and annul her neder. Conversely, Chacham say Yafer. The Chacham say no, he has the ability to go ahead and be mefer. Now the Ran says over here, the Chayvin shelo yada faras neder the Chayvin shelo yada faras neder zeh lo mikri yom shmiya. So we'll say the Chacham say no. Again, it's only essentially what the Chacham say says like this. The only way it's called yom shmiya is if what? You're fully knowledgeable in all areas. Namely, number one, you know that this is the type of neder that you have the ability to annul, and number two, you know that you have the power of annulment. Right? If those two ingredients are present, then that's called Yom Shmiya. If you're missing either one of those, it's not Yom Shmiya, and your day actually only begins when you have all the relevant knowledge. Says the Gemara, V'amai lehavi kishosek amanas lamekit. They will say, if Rabbi Chanina was correct, and there was a concept ultimately again of being silent, in a way that leaves open the window of annulment for a later period, then that should work in this case as well. Even Rabbi Meir should agree that Allah Lamaisa, it should be no worse. In other words, in a case where a husband didn't realize that he had the power to annul this neder, it should be no worse than the case of a husband who's purposely silent to trick his wife into thinking that he's affirming the neder when his intention is to annul it at a later time. If that works, to extend the window of annulment, then what? Certainly, again, a lack of knowledge should extend the window of annulment. The fact that it doesn't, according to Rabbi Meir, tells us that what? Tiyufta is an effective refutation of Rabbi Chanina. So we'll say, bottom line is, Rabbi Chanina is wrong, right? And the Gemara has proven that 3 times, right? Let's see, you sometimes have arguments like this, where you're arguing with someone, whoever that person may be, right? And the might say again, you know you're wrong. Fine, the person has proven you're wrong. And I was hearing part of those ones where it's not enough to prove once that you are wrong, but there is a desire to prove multiple times that you are wrong on multiple fronts. So apparently there is Judaic precedent for engaging in such an argument like that. And I say the Gemara for some reason does not feel content with disproving Rabbi Chanina once, but rather again 3 times. I will say, now the truth is, the Gemara happened to bring up another really fascinating cases in this, which we'll discuss, but bottom line I will say, what's the takeaway? The takeaway I will say is, number 1, affirmation, revocation, the window of that is 1 day. Definition of 1 day, calendar day. Not even 24 hours, calendar day. Also, but the other big chiddush is that silence is affirmation. And that silence is affirmation irrespective of whatever your kavanah with that silence is. Your kavanah of your silence is I'm angry and I'm going to affirm it. Your kavanah is I'm angry and I'm going to... It doesn't matter. Silence, by definition, ultimately again, is neder affirmation. Incredible. Hadrun aloch, nara muras. We'll say, mazel tov. Mazel tov, mazel tov. Let's go weiter. So we'll say, so now, is actually an incredible follow-up. Ve'elu nedarim shum mefer. We'll say, so now we're going to qualify. Right? The previous parak, we pretty much, we'll say, it's actually interesting. This actually, if you notice, by the way, this 10th parak of nedarim, nara murasa, really was hyper-focused on this topic of hafara. Right? It was all about hafara, all about the husband's ability, the father's ability to annul the nedarim of wife/daughter. So now we'll say, now let's qualify the scope of hafara. Ve'elu nedarim shum mefer. These are the type of nedarim that a husband has the ability to go ahead and annul. Dvarim sheish ban inui nefesh. So we'll say the first example are nedarim that have inui nefesh. Now we'll say inui nefesh, we're going to see, represents nedarim that have some type of afflictive repercussion, right? Or afflictive effect. So, for example, I will say, the Ran points out over here, it's not immediately clear what these nedarim are, but here's an example of a nedar that governs bathing. So I will say, so the inability to bathe is considered to be an afflictive thing. So this is called inui nefesh, right? Or im eskashet im lo eskashet. If I'm gonna put on, cosmetics or perfume or not. So I will say, these are considered to be, these are nedarim which the inability to bathe, the inability to put on cosmetics, ultimately again would consider to be personally afflictive. So that's the type of neder over which a husband has annulment possibilities. Amud Beis, Rabbi Yossi. Rabbi Yossi says no. Ein elu nidre inui nefesh. Rabbi Yossi says no. That's not a good example of nidre inui nefesh. Right? That's not a good example, ultimately again, of afflictive nedarim. Rabbi Yossi, take a look at the top ran ayin testament days. Rabbi Yossi ein elu nidre inui nefesh. Refresh begimara. The Rabbi Yossi nidre inui nefeshu to lo hadyon aval dvarim shebino lebino hadyon. Rabbi Yossi, what we're going to see over here is as follows. There's going to be two different types of nedarim. There's going to be a neder that's called a neder of inui nefesh, and there's dvarim beino lebeino. Now, I will say what we're going to see is what does that mean? So inui nefesh is exactly as it sounds, namely a neder which results in some type of self-afflictive behavior. Dvarim beino lebeino means nedarim which impact the nature of their marital relationship. So Rabbi Yossi, what the Ran is pointing out over here is, what Rabbi Yossi is arguing on is, Rabbi Yossi is saying this example of Nedarim, erchatz, bathing, or cosmetics, that's not called inui nefesh. That's called dvarim shebeino lebeino. That's called the neder that ultimately, again, has marital implications, or marital repercussions. So I says Rabbi Yossi, so what is ve'eluhein? We'll say ayin testament day, second line. Ve'eluhein nidre inui nefesh. So we'll say, what is a good example of nidre inui nefesh, of a neder ultimately again that is afflictive in nature? So what is it? For example, Amra konam peros ha'olam alai. For example, she says, I won't eat fruit. So we'll say, so here's what's interesting. So Rabbi Yossi's model, it seems to be that halacha l'maisa, an afflictive neder, is one that results in material deprivation. Right? She's materially depriving herself of something, right? I will not eat any fruit. Konam peros ha'olam alai. That's inui nefesh. So what's the halacha? Hare zeh yachal hafer. So we'll say this is an example of a neder that the husband has the ability to annul. Right? Why? Because we'll say, I just want to point out, Rabbi Yossi is not arguing on the principle. Right? The first principle the Mishnah espoused was, what type of nedarim does the husband have the ability to annul? Inui nefesh nedarim. Now there seems to be some type of machlokes. What exactly is inui nefesh? So the Tanakama gave an example of bathing and cosmetics. Rabbi Yossi says, no, that's not inui nefesh. Again, we'll see in the Gemara what the root of the machlokes is. What's inui nefesh? Deprivation. I won't eat any of the fruit of the world. That's inui nefesh. And therefore, again, husband has the ability to go ahead and annul it. However, for example, if she says, Peiros Medina Zu Alai, to both say, what happens if she says, I will not consume produce from Maryland? Produce from Maryland. So what's the halacha? That's not called inui nefesh. Why is that not called inui nefesh? Why not? Yavilam Medina Cheres, right? Because it will say he can always bring her fruit from someone else. In other words, what Rabbi Yossi seems to be saying is like this. Inui nefesh seems to have to be what? A total deprivation. Right? A total deprivation. But if it's just a partial deprivation that can be easily remedied by supplementing it from elsewhere, that's not called inui nefesh. So saying, I take a neder not to eat peros ha'olam, that's inui nefesh. But say, I won't eat peros of the world. But saying, I won't eat Maryland produce, I won't eat Maryland peros, that's not inui nefesh. And because it's not inui nefesh, therefore what? Husband does not have power of annulment over it. Peros chen v'nizalai. Similarly, we'll say if she says, "I will not eat any produce from Levi's store," right? Levi has a store. I'm not going to eat any produce from Levi's store. So we'll say, so what's the halacha? So So along the same lines, halacha l'maisa. So Reuven, husband, doesn't have the ability to make for that. Why not? Because we'll say in this model of inui nefesh by definition means what? Inui nefesh means a total deprivation. Over here, she's going ahead and she's prohibiting herself from eating from one store. Fine. So there's another store. Now watch this. However, and I will say, this is an interesting lashon. So we'll say, when you read this Gemara, what it sounds like it's saying is, but if the chenveni, let's say Levi's parnasa is only from the produce that Reuven purchases for Rachel, his wife, then ultimately, again, it can be made for. The Ran says that's not what it means. That's not what it means. Look at the Ran. It's actually incredible. first short line in the Ran. The Ran says, Shechen v'nizeh makifo v'lo yimsa achar shia makifo. So let's listen to this. What if Levi is the only shopkeeper who extends credit to Reuven? So right, that when Reuven is able to shop on credit. Now we'll say that could be a non-replicable benefit. So we'll say, so in this case over here, Levi is the only shopkeeper who extends credit. Upamim shelomos v'nim says he misane ilchach yafer. So we'll say, now listen to this. Now what could happen if Levi is the only shopkeeper who extends credit, and there are times where Reuven doesn't have cash? So we'll say, what's that? What is that going to mean? What is that going to mean? That sometimes Raphael is not going to have produce. Oh, so now this becomes a case of total deprivation. So we'll say here the distinction. So what's happening over here, what Rabbi Yossi seems to be framing, is that the definition of inui nefesh means something which results in total deprivation. So for example, Rachel takes a neder that says, I'm not going to eat peros ha'olam, produce. That's total deprivation. Therefore, again, that's inui nefesh. Therefore, a husband has the ability to go ahead and annul it. If she says, I won't eat fruit from this country, or from Maryland, that's not total deprivation. Therefore, again, he cannot annul it. Similar to the case of I won't eat Maryland produce, I'm not going to eat any produce from Levi's market. From Levi's market. What's the halacha? That's not total deprivation. There are other stores, therefore he can't annul it. I have a Rabbi Yossi, but if Levi's market is unique, how is it unique? Levi's the only guy who extends credit to Reuven, the husband, then that does become total deprivation. Why? Because there could be a situation where Reuven's not going to have funds. The ability for him to purchase produce is on credit. And if ultimately, again, Levi's market is closed off to him, that does represent total deprivation, and therefore be able to annul that neder. Good. David Rabbi Yossi. Good. So we'll say, so let's analyze. So we'll say, so I just want to point out now, all our Mishnah spoke about was Nedarim of Inui Nefesh. We'll call self-afflictive Nedarim. There seems to be a machlokes in the definition of Inui Nefesh, but we're not clear as to what exactly the machlokes is. We have the Tanakama and Rabbi Yossi given different types of examples, but Lamaisa not a clear definition. So here we go. It says the Gemara. Nidre Inui Nefesh u'demefer. Shebam inui nefesh eno mefer. So we'll say, is the Mishnah teaching me that the only type of nedarim that a husband has the ability to annul, ultimately again, are nidre inui nefesh, but a different type of neder, ultimately again, he cannot annul? So we'll say, the Mishnah seems to limit the husband's power of annulment to nidre inui nefesh. But is that true? Vatanya we learn, listen to this, ben ish leishto, ben av labito. So we'll say the pasuk of neder annulment speaks about the fact that what? That nedarim there are bein ish leishto, between husband and wife. He has the ability to. What does this mean? Malamed shabal mefer nedarim shebeino lebeino. And we'll say, what does it teach us? It teaches us that a husband has the power of annulment of nedarim that are between husband and wife. Now we'll say, now what does that mean? So nedarim that ultimately again impact the marital relationship. A husband has the ability to annul, even if what? Even if they're not self-afflicted. So the point the Gemara is making is there is another category of nedarim that a husband has the ability to annul. So to which the Gemara says, you're right, Amri, Halein v'Halein Mefer. Yeah, of course, you're right. The Mishnah just happens to be talking about one type of neder, but Enoch Inami, that is absolutely correct. A husband has the power of annulment both over nidre inui nefesh, self-afflictive nedarim, as well as what? Dvarim beino lebeino. Nedarim that ultimately impact their marital relationship. So the Gemara says, Mihu, watch this. Mihu, inui nefesh made for the olam. So we'll say, here's the distinction. With nedarim of inui nefesh, a husband has the ability to annul them forever. Aval ibam inui nefesh, ki de'isa techuse havyafara, nechi megarish la chayal ala nidra. We'll say, this is absolutely wild. Absolutely wild. Watch this. So we'll say, let's follow the progression. Right? So now we know a husband has the ability to annul his wife's nedarim. Now, what are we doing now in this parak? We are framing the scope of that power. So now we'll say we've just established there are two different types of nedarim that a husband could go ahead and annul. What are the two different types of nedarim? Number one, inui nefesh. What's the definition of inui nefesh? Self-afflictive. Now, the scope of self-affliction that has to be covered by the neder is a machlokes Tanakama and Rabbi Yossi. Fine. Self-affliction. And now, say second category, Dvarim beino lebeino. Ultimately, again, things that ultimately impact the marital relationship. Beautiful. So we'll say, wherein lies the distinction between these two types of neder? Get ready for this. When a husband goes ahead and annuls a self-afflictive neder, so ultimately, again, that annulment is in effect forever. When he goes and he annuls Dvarim shebeino lebeino, Nedarim, that impact the marital relationship, we'll say, get ready for this. That annulment is only in effect when? For how long? For the duration of the marriage. Once the marriage, or if the marriage comes to an end, then what? That neder once again resurfaces and becomes effective. Incredible. I'll say, take a quick look at the Rush. The Rush says over in the left-hand column, Ki megarish la chayla le nidra. Ki megarish chayla le nidra. So we'll say, listen to this. The Rush says, Dahachi mashma le hashta lishna dikra bein ish le ishto. We'll say, because remember again, the Gemara says like this, from where do you learn out that a husband has the ability to annul dvarim shebeino lebeina from the pasuk bein ish leishto, which tells us what? That it's only when they are ish veishto that he has this power of annulment. But we'll say, but once they're no longer ish veishto, then what? Then what? Then the neder is in effect. We'll say, givalt kechidish, absolutely incredible. So the Gemara is saying is like this: if it's inui nefesh, once he annuls it, that annulment is forever. But if it's not inui nefesh, but it's dvarim shebeino lebeina, things which impact the marital relationship. So essentially, I will say, he's not really annulling it. What is he doing? He's delaying it. Or he's annulling it for the duration of the marriage. But once the marriage is over, that neder resurfaces. So the Gemara says, 1 second. Udvarim shein bain inui nefesh ki megarish lachai lala. We'll say, is that true? So now, what about things? So things that are not inui nefesh. So now what you're telling me is, inui nefesh nedarim, when the husband goes ahead and annuls that neder is done. Gone. You right? But ultimately, again, dvarim shebeino lebeina, when he annuls it during the marriage, it's not in effect for the marriage. But once they're no longer ish veishto, then what? What does it sound like? Those in the Nedarim resurface. Is that true? Thought tonight we learned, Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri Amar, Yafar Shema Yergashena Ute Yisrael. Everybody, you know what we're going to do? We'll stop over here for today. This is a dramatic sugya. We'll say now. So now we've established is the power of hafara is not blanket. You can only be made for two types in Nedarim, right? Inui nefesh, that's our Mishnah, and advarim beino lebeina. Now the Gemara wants to make a distinction between those two types of Nedarim, and I will say to be continued tomorrow. Shkoyach. All right, have a great day, everyone.